Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sacramento County's Public Budget Workshop. Thank you all for joining us today to learn more about the county's budget. I'm Amanda Thomas, county's Chief Fiscal Officer, and I'll be providing an overview of the county's budget before we provide more information on 3 county departments that we're highlighting in today's workshop. Before that, though, I'd like to introduce our County Executive, Ann Edwards. Ann?
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you can all join us this evening. It's my pleasure to be here this evening to introduce Sacramento County's Budget Workshop. This workshop is a part of the county's plan to continue to enhance public understanding of and engagement in the county's budget. We have been implementing this plan over the last few years and plan to continue building on it in the years to come. This year, we're excited to be including presentations from the directors of 3 county departments to highlight the diversity of operations and funding sources across the county. As you will see from the presentations, the county's budget is quite complex, and we hope this workshop helps provide you with information about our budget and budget process that is clear and transparent. We also want to hear from you, and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions and provide input during the presentation. I will now turn it back over to Amanda, who will provide additional details about today's workshop and then begin with an overview of the county budget. Thank you again for joining us. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Ann. And I'm also really happy to be joined this evening by 3 directors of departments in the county. Also presenting tonight will be Emily Halkin, who is the director of the county's newest department, the Department of Homeless Services and Housing. We also have county's Chief Probation Officer, Marlon Yarber, and County Registrar of Voters, Hang Nguyen. So as I mentioned, you'll be hearing from the 3 of them about their operations and budgets in their departments. So before we jump into the presentation, and actually let me step back here. Before we jump into the presentation, I did want to go over some details for today's workshop. So first of all, I did want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and live streamed. For those that are attending live via Zoom, questions and comments can be submitted through the Zoom Q&A. And we do plan to pause at the end of each presentation for questions that you may have. Today's workshop is scheduled for 90 minutes, so we may not be able to get to every question, and we'll certainly follow up as necessary for any questions that we're not able to address live. If you have more detailed questions or comments, we also invite you to email at any time, budget@saccounty.gov. The email and that email address can be used either after this workshop or any time during the year if you are interested in information about the county's budget. I'll also be sharing that email address later in the presentation, as well as other ways to get more information and participate in the budget process. Finally, for those that are joining live via Zoom, we will also be conducting some polls during this evening's workshop and really encourage you to participate in those. Okay, so now getting into the workshop overview. So I'm going to start off with really just some budget basics, some sort of defining what is a budget framework, and some key concepts. And then I'll give a really high level overview of the county's budget and also let you know where you can go to find more information and what the opportunities are for getting involved in the budget process during the year. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be hearing from 3 departments tonight. So they're going to go over the programs and operations in the department and also funding sources for their department. So that's Homeless Services and Housing, Probation, and Voter Registration and Elections. So let's actually start off with a poll question. And this really is just to get a sense for why you chose to participate today and what interests you about the county's budget. So if we can go ahead and launch this poll. And for this poll, you should be able to select more than one answer. So please choose all of them that apply. And let's see, I am not seeing the poll launched. And there it is. Okay, so So hopefully you should be seeing, the question is, why are you interested in the county budget? So some possible choices are, you're just curious, you want to learn more, you have a professional interest or a community interest, or you're interested in maybe a specific program or issue, or perhaps we did not guess the reason that you're interested in, it's other. So please feel free to select any and all that apply to you. And let's give it a few more seconds and let's go ahead and end the poll and we will share the results. So it looks like 100% of the folks participating tonight have professional or community interest, and some of them are also interested in learning more. They're just curious. Okay, so thank you very much for participating in the poll. We'll go ahead and stop sharing those results and move on here to the next slide. Okay, so let's see. In the next few slides here, I'm going to briefly go over some very basic budget information. As I mentioned, I think that's just going to help kind of build a foundation for some of the information that we will be sharing tonight about the county's budget. So first of all, let's talk about what a budget is. And really at its most basic level, a budget is an annual spending plan that really reflects all of the funding that will be available during the year and then how that funding is going to be spent. For the county and other governments, the budget also provides the legal authority to actually spend money and then limits the amount of money that can be spent for specific purposes. And finally, a budget can be used as a way to set policy direction, but it's really more useful, I think, to view the budget as a policy implementation tool where the budget is really implementing policy decisions that have already been made. So for example, I'll be talking a little bit later about the process for developing budget priorities, which are adopted by the County Board of Supervisors based on input from the county residents. And then those priorities are implemented in the budget that's recommended to and approved by the board. So let's turn now to look a little bit at the legal and policy framework for the county's budget. And that basically means the rules that we have to follow in preparing and administering the budget as a county in California. So the first important set of rules is the County Budget Act, which is a state law that defines how all county budgets are supposed to be structured and approved. And so when I said earlier that the budget provides the legal authority to spend money and limits how much money can be spent, this law is where that comes from. And then the rules and requirements for this are included in the State Controller's Budget Guide. In addition to the County Budget Act, there are many state and federal laws, rules, and even contract provisions that impact the county's budget. So that includes rules for how funding must be spent, and then whether we need to provide a certain amount of local funding to match the funding that's coming from the state or the federal government. And then these laws and rules are really why we only have discretion and spending a relatively small amount of local resources. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So in addition to the state and federal rules, the county has its own rules that are spelled out in the county charter and county code, including describing the responsibility of county officials in the budget process. And then finally, in addition to the legal requirements, any board policy is reflected in the budget, and that includes the board's budget priorities that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so looking at some key terms and concepts, and there are several somewhat technical terms here, and I won't get too much into the detail, but I think it's important to have a basic understanding of some of these in order to understand the budget. So first, appropriations, that really means budgeted spending. So that's both money that's paid for services and supplies, as well as county employee wages and benefits. And then it's also money that is actually transferred to other parts of the county. And then revenue is the money that comes into the county to pay for that spending. And that revenue really falls into three broad categories according to what it can be used to pay for. So departmental revenue is revenue that's use is restricted to the programs within each county department. And this includes funding from state and the federal government for specific programs, as well as sometimes fees that are collected by departments for specific services. And then semi-discretionary revenue is money that the county receives from the state in the form of realignment and public safety sales tax. And we call this revenue semi-discretionary because it's restricted to certain broad categories within social services and public safety and justice departments. And I'll kind of give you some examples of those later. But we do have some discretion within those categories as to how to spend this money. And then finally, discretionary revenue is money that the county can use for any lawful purpose. And it primarily includes property tax and sales tax revenue. And then if you kind of follow that arrow over to the right, net county cost is actually the term that we use in the budget to describe the appropriations that are funded with those discretionary resources. And you'll sometimes hear that also referred to as general fund. So that's what that means. That means it's the spending of those discretionary resources. And then in addition to revenue, appropriations can also be funded with fund balance. So that's basically like money in the county's bank account. And once that money is spent, it isn't then available to spend again in future years. And then instead of spending fund balance, that money can be just set aside in reserves, sort of like a savings account to be available when it might be needed in future years. Okay, so now that we've gone over some of the basics, we're going to dig in a little bit into the county's budget specifically. But first, I wanted to let you know that you can go to the Office of Budget and Debt Management website to access all of the resources I'll be talking about. So I will show you that link later, and everything that I'm going to show you on the next several slides you can find on that website. So the county budget document is by far the most comprehensive source of information about the county's budget. It includes all of the elements that are listed here on this slide. And we actually publish 3 budgets per year. But it is a very lengthy document. It's over 1,000 pages long. And that may be too much information if what you're looking for is just a higher level understanding of the budget. So if that's the case, for that, I would really recommend the Budget in Brief document, which is also available on our website. It includes a lot of the information that I'll be going over in this presentation, and it's just 7 pages long, so it's really a much easier read. For anyone out there who is more interested in an interactive way of understanding the county's budget, we also have the Budget Explorer tool on the website, and that allows you to drill into the budget to see department and expenditure type detail in a graphical format. Okay, and that then brings us to our next poll. And so the rest of these are really meant to test your knowledge a little bit. If you don't know the answer, I'm going to give it to you later, but just give it your best guess. So this question is, which revenue category represents the largest source of funding in the county budget? Oh, and I see that this is actually a little bit different than the question I have here on this slide. That's okay. So go ahead and answer the poll question that's listed here. And let's give folks a couple more seconds. So your choices are that discretionary category, semi-discretionary, or departmental. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll. And share the results. Okay. And so it looks like the departmental category has won out here, and this is a well-informed group because that is the correct answer. So let's go ahead and stop sharing. And we'll move on here, and you will see that you got the right answer. Okay. All right, so this chart here is showing us how the county's total overall appropriations for the current fiscal year, so that's the fiscal year 23-24, of about $8.8 billion in total are funded. And you can see that the largest category is indeed departmental revenue at about $5 billion. Another really big slice of the pie is transfers within the county. So that's really just money that's moving around between different units of the county, and that accounts for $2 billion of that total $8.8 billion in appropriations. And then semi-discretionary revenue is about $1 billion. And discretionary funding is actually also just about $1 billion. And within that, you can see, and this was the answer to the poll question that I had written on the slide, you can see that the largest source of that is property tax revenues at about $604 million. So this chart is showing that same $8.8 billion in appropriations, except that it's showing how the money is being spent. So about $2.1 billion is in what we're calling non-operating and other budgets, and that roughly lines up with those transfers that I showed you on the previous slide. So again, sort of money that is moving around within the county budget. Of the $6.3 billion in operating budgets, you can see off to the right how that is distributed among the different functional areas, with social services representing the largest share at $2.4 billion. And this includes one of the departments that's featured today, homeless services and housing, as well as other departments such as child, family, and adult services, health services, and human assistance. Community services represents the next largest share at about $2 billion. And this includes departments like transportation, regional parks, airports, and waste management and recycling. Public safety and justice represents about $1.2 billion and includes another department from this workshop, probation, as well as other departments such as sheriff, district attorney, and public defender. And then support services, including internal services like technology, finance, and personnel, and general government represent smaller shares of total spending, with the third department today, voter registration and elections, included in this group. So these charts are actually showing us those same overall totals by functional area, with the size of each of these donut charts reflecting the relative size of the budget for those functional areas, and then show how the funding breaks out in terms of the three categories of revenue that we talked about earlier. So you can see that the green departmental category, that's the largest category for every area except for public safety and justice. And in social services, this is largely state and federal funding, whereas in community services, this departmental funding includes fees and other revenues for many of the services provided by the county. So I did want to talk briefly about some of the key factors that are impacting the county's budget this year as we look forward to next year. The county does receive one-time sources of funding for certain programs. And this actually includes funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, which you may have heard of. And actually, as I think you'll hear in Emily's presentation, this is a significant source of funding for some of the county's initiatives to address homelessness. And one of the things that we have to consider with ARPA and other one-time sources, including fund balance, is the sustainability of the programs that are funded with these sources. And that really requires identifying additional sources of funding in the future. And looking at the budget, the county also has to consider legal obligations, which must be funded. So one example you may have heard of is the May's consent decree regarding the conditions of confinement in the county's jails, which has required substantial investments in recent years and will require additional investments in future years, both to improve the jail conditions and also to continue to implement programs designed to reduce the jail population. And Chief Yarber will be speaking to some of those programs in his presentation. The county also has significant capital and maintenance needs, and that includes hundreds of millions of dollars in backlog for things like road maintenance. And we also, of course, are impacted by what's going on in the economy generally. So with inflation in recent years resulting in increased costs, as well as continued economic uncertainty as the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates, which has really had a negative impact on the housing market and could reduce future property tax revenues, which again are the county's main source of discretionary funding. And because, really many of those in the community who rely on the social and other services performed by the county need these services the most during economic downturns, it is really important for the county to try to maintain services to the maximum extent possible. And one of the ways that we can do that is by trying to build our reserves to a level where we are able to weather an economic storm. So this chart here actually shows us what happened to the county's tax revenue during the last Great Recession. And what this is illustrating is that we would have needed $600 million in reserves in order to continue funding services at the same level that we were doing pre-recession. And of course, today that number would be even higher. And while we've made some progress in recent years, including funding a service stability reserve, we do still have a ways to go, and it will be important to continue building reserves to the extent feasible. So I mentioned the budget priorities earlier, and I wanted to share some of the process that supported development of those priorities leading up to this year's budget. Which actually started in mid-2021 with input from the county's advisory boards and commissions that informed a public opinion survey of county residents in the fall of 2021. We then followed up with focus groups of county residents in the fall of 2022, which really reinforced the results of the survey. And then based on the results of the survey, which was scientifically representative of county residents, the board adopted budget priorities in December 2021, and then reaffirmed those priorities in January of 2023. And I'll show you what those priorities are for this current year's budget on the next slide. We're now in the process of revisiting those priorities for fiscal year 2024-25, and that process included conducting a follow-up survey of county residents that took place last month, and the results of that survey and the recommendations for the fiscal year 2024-25 budget priorities will be presented to the Board of Supervisors next week on December 12th. So the board approved budget priorities for the current fiscal year 2023-24 are shown here, and they echo a lot of the themes that we already talked about. So they are first and foremost complying with the county's obligations. Second, maintaining existing services in the county, and then third, funding new or enhanced programs that really focus on these focus areas that are shown here. So a county-wide focus area of addressing homelessness and its impacts, and then an unincorporated focus area of improving road conditions in the county. Oh, and I did mean to say before I jumped off of this, while we are recommending some refinement to the language for these priorities for fiscal year 24-25, again, that recommendation going to the Board of Supervisors next week, the recommended priority focus areas that you see here off to the right are really very consistent with the existing priorities. Okay, and then that brings us to our next polling question. And if we can go ahead and launch the poll. It may be what's on the slide, it may be something else. So for the fiscal year that begins on July 1st, when do county departments submit budget requests? Okay, so your choices are September of the prior year, February, April, or June. So again, this is the year that begins July 1. When are we asking departments for their budget requests? Nice. And this may be a trick question. It looks like folks are still responding. Let's give it a couple more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. All right, so we have about a third of folks saying September of the prior year and about 2/3 of folks saying February. You're actually all kind of right. I mean, the answer for most departments is February, but for our internal service departments, we do actually start in September. So those folks are right as well. Smart group here. All right, let's go ahead and stop sharing. And all right, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so the next several slides show the complete budget timeline. So we just talked about budget requests being due in February. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but I did want to point out some of the key dates with the blue boxes at the bottom, really showing and highlighting planned public meetings and opportunities for the public to participate in the budget process. And then the top part is really giving you an idea of our internal budget process. So you can see here, the bottom of this slide, here we are, December 7th, public budget workshop. I mentioned that next week on December 12th is when we will be recommending budget priorities for the 24-25 budget to the Board of Supervisors. And that's happening in December because really in January, that's when when we give departments budget instructions and they really start working on their budget requests. As we just said, those requests are due in February. In March, we will have another meeting at the Board of Supervisors to present our second quarter fiscal review. So that's for this current fiscal year, 23-24, an update on where we are. And then as we move into the spring, you can see that our recommended budget for 24-25 will be released at the end of May. And then budget hearings for that recommended budget will be June 5th through 7th. So again, those are the public budget hearings. And then as we move beyond that, you can see that once that budget is approved in June before the fiscal year starts in July, we're not done yet with the budget. So what happens once the current fiscal year closes is that we get information that we didn't have when we were developing the recommended budget. An important piece of information is what the actual fund balances will be after the close of the fiscal year. So with that new information, we make revisions to the budget. And those revisions go back to the board in the form of a revised recommended budget. So those budget hearings are in September 4th through 6th. And when that revised recommended budget is approved, that goes back to the board to be formally adopted as the county's adopted budget for fiscal year 24-25, and that will be on September 24th. Okay, so in addition to participating in upcoming public meetings, here are some other ways to get involved or just to learn more about the budget. So first, I wanted to let you all know that this recorded presentation will be available on the county's YouTube page. If you would like to go back to watch it or recommend it to anyone who you know is interested in the county's budget. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you can submit questions and comments at any time by email to budget@saccounty.gov. You can view budget documents, so the complete budget documents, as well as the budget in brief, that abbreviated version that I showed to you, as well as use the Budget Explorer tool on the Office of Budget and Debt Management webpage. So that's bdm.saccounty.gov. You can apply to serve on a county advisory board, write, email, or phone your county supervisor, or sign up to receive information about the county's budget. And we will show this slide again at the end of the presentation. And this PowerPoint will also be posted to our website where you can access these links at any time. I would really like to thank everyone for their interest and want to pause now to see if there are any questions that I can address from the Q&A.
No questions, Amanda.
No questions. Okay, well, thank you. I will now turn it over to Emily Halkin, the county's Director of Homeless Services and Housing.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it. As Amanda said, my name is Emily Halkin, and I'm the Director of the county's Department of Homeless Services and Housing, and really happy to be here and be included in this conversation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the department and who we are and what we do and how we work with the community, and then some more detail about our specific budget. As Amanda said at the beginning, we are the county's newest department. We were formed officially this January, but all of the functions and funding came over to the department effective July 1st. So this is our first fiscal year as a department. We inherited a lot of contracts and programs from other social service departments, notably human assistance and health services, but also have really been taking on a lot of really new projects. As Amanda pointed out, addressing homelessness has been a board and community priority. And so we're really happy to be able to provide some more intense oversight and services to the community. We are within the social service agency. And so our main focus is on, again, the delivery of services and programs to help prevent and end homelessness. But it's also really important that we are seen as a resource to the broader community, working with our municipal service agencies, public safety offices, to help address the impacts, the unintended impacts of unsheltered homelessness in our community. Because of that, our work is naturally very, very multidisciplinary as well as multi-jurisdictional. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like for us. We work with a variety of community partners, and generally, though, our work falls into these four very broad categories. First, outreach and engagement. That's working with folks who are currently living unsheltered. Second is providing sheltering and interim housing options. Third is creating opportunities for permanent housing. And then the final bucket of work is around system development and support for a lot of our partners doing this work. One of the really unique things about Department of Homeless Services and Housing is that unlike all of the other social services agencies, health services, child welfare, there is no mandate federally, state, or locally that any entity, city, county, state, etc., to shelter or house people experiencing homelessness. There certainly is a huge moral obligation, and I think the board's creation of this department really reflects their commitment to that. But as a department working on this really cross-sector issue without a clear mandate, a lot of our work is coordination across other departments. There also, without a direct mandate, there is not often ongoing funding. So as we look at our budget later, you will see a significant amount of our budget comes from local commitments directly from the board. We don't do this alone, and I'm going to give you a bigger picture as well of what other efforts the county is doing outside of our department. And a lot of the systemic efforts that are underway, the county's participating in. If you're interested in understanding how the community at large is addressing homelessness, I'd really encourage you to look at some of these works, specifically the Local Homelessness Action Plan, which outlines the community-wide efforts to prevent and end homelessness. There's a recently enacted city and county partnership agreement, which really outlines roles and responsibilities between the city of Sacramento specifically and the county of Sacramento. And then, of course, a lot of our work, as I said, while we inherited some work from our partner agencies and social services, there's still a lot of overlap. And every day we are co-delivering projects with social service departments, mostly health services, human assistance, and child, family, and adult services. Another unique thing I think about the way that the county addresses homelessness is because there is no single mandate for the county to lead this effort. We have different roles that we play depending on where we're geographically at in the county. And these are outlined here very generally, but wanted to highlight them because this is often where a lot of community questions come into play. Who's in charge of what part of the system? So countywide, regardless of whether you're within an incorporated city or not, it is our responsibility as a county to ensure access and to benefits and social services, whether that be mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment and prevention, access to benefit programs like Medi-Cal, CalFresh. And it is our responsibility to make those accessible to folks regardless of housing status. We are also responsible to provide supportive services within homeless programs administered by other jurisdictions. So if another jurisdiction opens a shelter, we will overlay some of our staff to help connect folks to those social benefit programs. In the unincorporated county, though, we also play a municipal role. And because the unincorporated county has such a large and diverse and population, we are doing a lot of things that other cities are doing related to unsheltered homelessness. That is inclusive of direct street outreach. So we are responsible for deploying navigation services and other services directly into encampments to help people move out of homelessness and into shelter or housing. We're also in the unincorporated county responsible to coordinate with those municipal service departments or law enforcement to address impacts. So for example, if our Department of Transportation has a roadway project that they need to undertake and there's a homeless encampment, in that area, we will co-deploy with them to ensure that they can safely complete their project and the people who are living in that roadway are provided services. Then within the cities of the county, there are 7 cities in the county. We work very collaboratively with the cities to ensure that if they have outreach teams, we are co-deploying with them our social service partners. That's specific, most typically behavioral health. So we will co-deploy with a city-led navigation team, behavioral health clinicians to help people link and access those services if they live within any of the cities. And again, as I said before, if they open and operate shelters, we'll ensure those wraparound services are available in those city-run shelters. A little bit more specifics about some of the things that we do. I already talked a lot about outreach and engagement. In the unincorporated county, our outreach and engagement is very multidisciplinary. We're co-deploying outreach navigators along with mental health clinicians and peer navigators. They deploy both proactively to encampments that we may identify, that may come to us from a constituent complaint, that may come to us from one of our county departments, and we'll spend time in the camp as long as it takes, really with the goal of helping people move out of homelessness. We also deploy outreach responsive base. This is like I just described with the Department of Transportation, or if the sheriff or park rangers encounter an unsafe situation or people with extreme vulnerabilities. And then especially out in the unincorporated areas of the county, in the more suburban areas where the intensity of homeless encampments typically isn't as concentrated, we'll deploy our outreach staff to hold office hours so that the community at large knows where they can send somebody who may be in need, but isn't in a really large concentrated encampment. The other things that we do in terms of outreach and engagement are about encampment services. So currently we do some work around sanitation stations, toilets, hand washing stations in large encampments. We also support the delivery of water, especially during weather events. And we also support the removal of debris, either in a camp that's active or after a camp is vacated. The second large focus area is in shelter and housing. And certainly while housing is one of the main goals and certainly a primary solution to homelessness, we have such a crisis of unsheltered homelessness right now that we're really focusing on building up and diversifying our shelter options. We have been as a county and continue to operate about 1,000 beds of congregate type shelter. This is the shelter you might imagine where you walk into a large room and there's a bunch of cots laid out and people sort of cohabitate together. And while those are great options, what we have found in recent years and has been proven by research and just by experience of people is that the preference is and a better outcome for people is non-congregate shelters. So the board has really taken made an active choice to pivot away from new shelters that are congregate and building up what we call safe stay communities. And what is specifically unique about safe stay communities is that they are non-congregate. This picture here is our first one we opened a couple months ago down in Florin. Tiny homes, sleeping cabin shelters where people can individually shelter with their partners or their pets. We also make sure that there's very low barriers to entry. So we accept people as they are, again, wrapping around services and housing exits with a goal of addressing street homelessness right there in the community. The final sort of bucket of work that I mentioned at the front end, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, is our work with our system partners. We can't and don't do this alone. The county certainly brings a lot of resources to the table, but our city partners do as well. A large organization called Sacramento Steps Forward, who serves as our continuum of care, meaning that they receive and administer a lot of federal funds for housing, specifically for housing for folks exiting homelessness. They also are responsible for administering a federally mandated database and managing the front door into our system, which we call coordinated access. And so the system really is all of those pieces working together, and we're doing a lot of work, again, under the guide of the local homelessness action plan that was adopted by the board earlier this year, to build up and develop a system that really is well integrated and that's easy to access and understand for the people we're trying to serve. So the next poll question, if you want to bring it up, Haley, is which of the work areas for the Department of Homeless Services and Housing is primarily focused in the unincorporated county? Yeah, give folks a couple more seconds. And then if you want to close it, Haley, and see what. Okay, so got a lot of variety here. It may be a little bit of a misleading. Most of our work is countywide. Outreach is the one place where we really put on a different hat when we're in the unincorporated county. So while we partner in the cities for outreach, we lead the efforts in outreach in the unincorporated county. So I'll go ahead and close this. Okay, so before I talk about our department's budget, again, we're a brand new department, so we don't even have a year under our belt. I wanted to give a little bit of context. I've been talking throughout this about how we don't do this alone, and we are really multi-jurisdictional and multi-departmental. This is a multi-departmental effort. So last year, our staff took a look at the prior year, so fiscal year 22-23, what the county at large had allocated to addressing homelessness. And you can see it's just under $180 million. We're underway in updating this for the coming year, so we'll hopefully soon have that to share with you. What this is inclusive of is everything that comes out of our department, but a lot of efforts that come out of other departments, some of whom are here today. This includes a lot of efforts from health services. This includes some of the efforts from our park rangers, for example, a whole host of efforts that are throughout the county departments to prevent and address homelessness. And you can see that most of that is done externally with contracted community organizations, with a small amount staying inside the county. And then you can see the budget breakdown. As I mentioned at the front end, because homelessness really is a multi-layered issue. There's no singular funding source. We get funds from the state, the federal government, a lot of general fund, and some other funding sources as well. Important to note here, and Amanda did say this, is about 20% of this look from a year and a half ago is one-time allocation. A lot of that is related to the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funds, and you'll see that reflected in our budget as well. So the board made the biggest commitment from ARPA towards homelessness and housing. And so a lot of our current expenditures and buildup of new programs really has been because of that commitment of ARPA funds. So then when you look at just our department's budget, this is the current year where we are spending our budget. Our overall budget of that $177 million is about $51.5 million. So you can really see a whole lot of efforts are being made within other county departments to support the efforts coming out of the Department of Homeless Services. And as I sort of touched on these different areas, you can see how our expenditures line up. The vast majority of our funds right now are going into sheltering programs. In part, that's because we are overseeing over 1,100 shelter beds, but we're also building up those new safe stay shelters that I was referred to, and that takes a lot of effort and a lot of investment. The second biggest category is in rehousing, which is great to see because we need those exits from sheltering, and we're trying to do some more investments around rehousing. Obviously, there's some administration operations, especially in building up a new department. And then outreach and engagement is the sort of last significant bucket of work that we're doing. when you look at where our funding comes from, again, as I've said and Amanda has said, a lot of our funding is coming locally. And while this pie shows that only 50% is general fund, if we didn't have that 21% of federal ARPA funds, which is unique to the current fiscal time, but will no longer be available in a few years, you'd probably see a more significant general fund contribution if we were to keep up the same level of work that we're doing. We get about a quarter of our funds from the state, very little from the federal that is not ARPA. So this really underscores the fact that homelessness as a body of work doesn't have a committed, dedicated funding stream. So we're constantly looking for new funding streams and new opportunities to partner with the state and federal government. And then finally, the last poll question, for me at least, is what is the most unique thing about our new safe state communities? Hey, Haley, do you want to close that? And yeah, and most people got that. So they definitely, one of the most unique things is the non-congregate component. That was a very purposeful, but I do want to point out, even though I didn't talk about the pets, that is also very unique. We have been working over the past few years at incorporating pets into our other shelters. It's much more difficult in congregate shelters. And so, yes, the non-congregate shelters also allow much easier pathway for us to shelter folks with their pets, which is incredibly important. And I think with that, I'm going to pause, see if there's any questions that I missed. And if there are not, Kim?
No open questions, Emily.
Okay. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Marlon Yarber, our Chief Probation Officer.
Yes, thank you, Emily, and good evening. It's great to be here. I'm Marlon Yarber, Chief Probation Officer. I've been with the county now 10 years this week, spending the last 2 as the Chief Probation Officer. Invite you all to listen in as I give a little overview relative to the department and the work that we do. The probation department, I assume, many folks do not know much about, as much of our work is really confidential, primarily around the status of our clients, both juveniles and adults who've touched the justice system. Much of that information is really private and not shared publicly. The first 2 bullets here on this slide really identify what are our primary mandates. We're tasked with the background investigation and development of social history reports that go to the courts, both adult and juvenile. And second, maintaining and operating the county's juvenile hall. Juvenile hall is a really complex part of our operations, and within it we have a newly established treatment program called the Valley Oak Youth Academy, which I'll talk a bit about later. Additionally, there are just a myriad of programs, day of reporting, our jail diversion treatment and resource center, and our work with the collaborative courts, of course, and all of the court partners. None of that, though, is done in a vacuum. It's done really in partnership with many different entities, some of whom you're hearing from tonight. But we work with local law enforcement, behavioral health services, the courts, as mentioned, education as well, in order to accomplish our mission. Lastly, the last and final bullet on this slide is what folks probably most commonly think of as it relates to what probation is about, and that's supervising those folks who've been granted the privilege of existing on probation in the community. Excuse me. A little bit of information around the population under our oversight. And much of this information, actually all of this information, I think is found also on our webpage if you want additional info. We currently have about 1,500 youth under our oversight. That number is down considerably just in the last 10 years. About 10 years ago, there were close to 4,000 youth under our oversight. And it's with many of the reforms we've implemented and led and partnered with, including all of those entities I previously mentioned, we've been able to drive that number down. The population today in our youth detention facility is actually 170. I think it was 182 when we drafted this slide. That entails, again, a complex array of services, 24/7 care of youth who are in our custody, awaiting court, awaiting release dates, etc. Our adult probation population is about 15,000 right now. That number also down considerably, as just a couple of years ago we were spearheading county efforts to address, I think it was Assembly Bill 1950, which provided some relief to individuals on probation for considerable lengths of time. It reduced, I think, down to a year those who were on for misdemeanors, and down to 2 years for those who were on for nonviolent felonies. Within that number are some of our other responsibilities. Supervision of the post-release community supervision population. So these would be individuals who are getting released to us directly from state prison. So this would have been a responsibility prior to 2011, responsibility of the Department of California Corrections and Rehabilitation. Those folks had been supervised by parole agents, but now since 2011 supervised by probation officers. The mandatory supervision population, these would be individuals also tied to that 2011 realignment who would have previously gone to state prison, but instead are serving a commitment locally here in our county jail. They then themselves are also subsequently supervised on probation if supervision time is remaining. The traditional adult felony probation population identified there, just under 10,000, and the adult non-felony probation population. The last bullet notes one of our newer responsibilities. Since October 2019, we've been operating a very successful pretrial program, and there are currently 608 individuals there who have yet to have their cases resolved. So we're careful about the wording and language. We're monitoring them, not yet supervising them, as their cases have not resolved. And of course, they're presumed innocent until proven guilty. I will give you just really the lay perspective of how our department is organized. This gives you a little overview, if you will, of how we're structured. We have 7 different divisions across the department. First listed is our administrative support and professional standards. That includes everything from the Office of the Chief, our fiscal team, who I'm sure are watching this presentation, but also our professional standards. So things like our policy development, our training, which we're very proud of. We identify ourselves as leaders in that capacity, and our internal affairs. So addressing complaints, both internal and complaints from the community. Second, our adult community corrections division. This is a division that was stood up, I think, in 2011 in response to public safety realignment. It currently manages our screening, intake, and assessment function, so identifying the needs and risk factors of our adult population. Also manages our day reporting centers, 3 of which spread across the county, and the connection to the courts, specifically the collaborative courts. Third bullet, our adult field operations. This would encompass our supervision of some of our more high-risk individuals in the community, including things like those who are on probation for domestic violence or family violence offenses, sex offenders, and also our gang enforcement team. Next, our adult court services. So this is tied to that first bullet and mandate, if you will, that I described in relation to our investigative responsibilities and development of pre-sentence investigation reports and recommendations to the Superior Court. Next, our juvenile court services, mirroring what I just described in adult court, but really doing investigative works around families and youth who were before us, who are now justice involved, and trying to determine, what are all the factors that contributed to a youth coming to the attention of law enforcement, and identifying perhaps, how we can apply interventions that maybe steer them away from further penetration into the system. Our juvenile field operations, this is a division that provides that supervision of youth, both in the community, but also supervision of youth who've been placed into short-term residential treatment programs across the state. So this would be what previously many folks who are familiar with probation operations would know as out-of-home placement or foster care. Lastly, the youth detention facility, as I mentioned, very complex work, something we're also very proud of. I think we are still the only county and probation department to have a youth detention facility that has won a national award 3 times now, and that's relative to the culture that we've instilled in our department, but specifically in the detention facility, and the array of services, supports, treatment, alternatives, et cetera, that we've implemented in the facility. It's notable as it's rated for 416 beds, but as I mentioned today, there are just 170 youth, and that really sort of identifies for you that there's lots of empty space, much of which we have repurposed for more positive alternatives. So we have, for example, a fully functioning library in our facility, a boys and girls club, multi-sensory rooms. We have both culinary and construction programming, etc. So the workforce, again, we do none of this alone. We're a department of some size, so 715 full-time employees. About 600 of those are sworn, about 100 or the balance, 115 are our administrative professionals. And that includes everything from, or everyone, I should say, from the food service workers who are cooking meals for our youth, laundry, taking care of laundry in the facility, all the way up through our fiscal team and analysts who help develop things like this presentation and ensure that we have great data collection. You get a sense of the amount of work involved in youth detention, just given that there are 230 plus staff assigned to that. In addition to that 230, there are also staff from other county departments embedded in the operation. So I mentioned some of the things we're proud of with the facility specifically. It's also of note that we have a fully accredited high school and junior high school. We also have college programming, as well as a fully accredited medical clinic inside of our facility. So really an opportunity to say thank you to our partners in that regard. So our first poll question. Probation Department's fiscal year 23-24 adopted budget consists of 1,715 full-time employees. So true, false, a bit of a trick question, but I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Don't think too long. Haley, we can maybe go ahead and close the poll, just given that it's true, false. And the result's false. Very good. You're paying close attention. So not 1,715, but just 715. Thank you. We can move on from the poll. So some of our goals are included in the presentation tonight. One of the goals, something that I touched on just briefly as it relates to the youth detention facility and a newer responsibility. So in 2020, new legislation, Senate Bill 823, realigned youth at the furthest end of the juvenile justice continuum from the care and custody of the state of California, the Division of Juvenile Justice, and moved them essentially to the responsibility of county probation departments statewide. And so the department, along with really comprehensive committee of experts and stakeholders, have helped develop the plan that we've implemented and have received some nice attention for, and stood up what we now call the Valley Oak Youth Academy inside of our youth detention facility. And it is, again, tasked with providing therapeutic programs and treatment, supportive and transitional housing for youth at the point of reentry, identifying pro-social activities, so teaching kids, how to celebrate and enjoy, educational achievements, or participate in and demonstrate good sportsmanship in athletic events. And lastly, knowing that and recognizing that, every youth that's currently in our care and custody will be getting out at some point. How can we better equip them with the vocational and educational services that support that successful reentry? In the photos there, you can see our emblem, the Valley Oak, which I believe is native to the Sacramento region and has a lot of symbolism as it relates to the growth we want to see in our kids. But also there, the youth, as you can see on the scaffolding, participating in the annual shed building competition, which many other traditional high schools participate in as well. That new responsibility is coming at us very fast, and this slide really just notes the rate in which the number of commitments has increased over time. So I referenced beginning in 2020, and as you can see now, we're well over 50 youth committed to that program. As I touched upon, the responsibility itself is complex, but also eats at some of that repurposed space that I mentioned. So many of the programs that we have and have currently implemented, we are trying to maintain and obviously support the direction of the court and the court partners relative to these commitments. Another goal for us, as I believe the county fiscal officer referenced, was supporting the county in addressing reduction of the jail population. Probation is historically, I think, the number one alternative, if you will, but we continue to evolve and expand our services and try to provide tools and options for the courts, but also our partners managing the jail. And this is probably most evident in the expansion this year of our pretrial program, so really moving to more closely a 24/7 operation, better assessing those who might be afforded pretrial release. For the first time ever, at least as far as I can tell, and asking around the department, standing up a mental health unit. So giving the court the option to release individuals who, but for their mental illness or episodes, might otherwise be normal functioning citizens. And so we're better able to provide that level of supervision, connection to services and treatment with the officers assigned there. We've done other things as well, looking at how we can expand our day reporting center, but also implementing a recalled warrant process that helps someone avoid what can be a costly experience and exposure to the jail when we know where someone is and can get them redirected and connected to court with a future court date. It can help us all move them along without touching jail if possible. Few additional highlights. So my colleague Emily Halkin over homeless services touched upon that as a county priority, obviously. Probation not missing that designation ourselves, trying to figure out ways that we can impact that population. So we've been awarded a mobile services grant, and so we're quickly moving towards equipping a few vehicles that will better help us do some outreach to encampments, but can also help address communities and families where maybe transportation is an issue. If you're struggling with reporting to our offices, and that's maybe the barrier, this mobile service opportunity might assist there. I think I've touched upon the Valley Oak Youth Academy and our mental health unit. An additional highlight and goal for the year and the coming years is to continue to develop and evolve our jail diversion treatment and resource center. So this is a fairly new program, if you will, and site that we operate in conjunction with other county partners, primarily focused, at least at the outset, on the misdemeanant mental health population. Our hope is that we can expand it and provide treatment to those who are subject to felony mental health cases and perhaps others, so that we can again provide alternatives that support public safety, but also better use the limited resources that we have. I believe I've referenced the last three bullets there. Our enforcement work continues. So the charge of probation is trying to balance, if you will, both accountability and opportunity. And provided folks want to make themselves available to the opportunities, it makes the accountability much less important. But if not, we remain ready to also use those tools in our tool belt. Let's move to the next slide. So our next poll question, which division is not part of probation? So I'll give you a few seconds here as you got a few options to choose from. All right, hopefully that's long enough. Hey, Haley, if you wouldn't mind showing us the results. There's no one fooled in this this audience, so general services, correct. So onto our budget. We are currently operating, I believe, about $206 million a year. We've grown some given those newer responsibilities that I've referenced. Our budget is largely things other than the county general fund. So as you'll note, 38% general fund, but when you combine some of these semi-discretionary and this other state revenue, you really get it, closer to almost 60% of our budget being state funded, things other than the general fund. And so this would include things like Assembly Bill 109, public safety realignment, the work that I touched upon with Senate Bill 823 and Division of Juvenile Justice realignment, but also the historical funding streams like Senate Bill 678, which incentivizes our work at keeping people out of jail and prison, along with things like the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act and the Youthful Offender Block Grant. I always find like the labels of other interesting, and I'm sure many of our participants would wonder, what's included in other. So other includes things like grants, asset forfeiture, interdepartmental fund transfers. Our federal line item here, we get a couple other small pots of money. We have a grant, I think that's from the federal government, that supports our work with addressing driving under the influence. This also includes Title IV funding, so some of our upstream prevention work, our school nutrition program. I touched upon the youth detention facility and the care there, and it includes school nutrition as part of, we're eligible, I should say, for that funding stream as part of our delivery of care. So I think that concludes the probation portion of the presentation, but it's my pleasure to introduce next to you Hang Nguyen, our Registrar of Voters.
Thank you, Chief Yarber. My name is Hang Nguyen, and I'm the Registrar of Voters, and I oversee the Department of Voter Registration and Elections. We administer all elections for the residents and the registered voters of Sacramento County, and some of our main initiatives are to promote civic engagement, maintain the local voter registration database, coordinate with state, local, and federal entities, and encourage informed voter and candidate participation. But lastly, I do want to highlight one of our more recent initiatives, and that is to go paperless. And by that, we mean we're moving a lot of our educational materials, such as flyers at community events, to QR codes in which a user is able to be directed to our website for additional information. We're also engaging in a massive messaging campaign on all of our election materials to provide voters with the opportunity to go paperless and receive their voter information guide electronically. For some context, the voter information guide for the November 2022 election was just a little bit over 2 tons of paper. So that's just a lot of paper, and we're trying to do everything that we can to reduce our footprint. The team here at Voter Registration and Elections is going to be 35 full-time employees. We also have 6 embedded staff from the Department of Technology. And across that, we have 6 divisions that support our functions. We have our administrative services function, which handles all of our human resources, our media, our fiscal components. Our campaign services department is going to work directly with the candidates, the campaigns, the districts, anybody that comes to the front counter to ensure that they are getting the best customer service available. We also have a precinct operations and warehouse team, and they are responsible for orchestrating all of our vote center in-person voting logistics, followed by our vote by mail operations team, who is responsible for all things related to a vote by mail ballot. So that also includes organizing and maintaining strict chain of custody for all of our official ballot drop boxes throughout the entire county. Next up, we have our voter registration and outreach team, who is solely responsible for local voter file maintenance and voter education and outreach. We also have our embedded IT team here that is over voting systems and technology. This team is going to be responsible for ensuring all of our voting systems are compliant with certification requirements set forth by the California Secretary of State. And they also support all other technical components in the VRE environment. I wanted to quickly just bring up the election timeline that reflects the time period in which VRE has to establish, configure, conduct, and certify every single election. As you can see from this timeline, from beginning to end, we have about 143 days to get all of this work done, to build the election from scratch, ensuring all of the candidates and contests are on ballot, and the time that we are required to canvass through all the votes to ensure all eligible votes are cast and included in the certification. But of course, we don't do this alone. We have a lot of help from 6 divisions, the 6 divisions that were previously mentioned, that seamlessly collaborate and support the VRE programs. So let's get into the programs. Our current voter registration count is sitting at about 878,370 registered voters. This number will fluctuate regularly due to our team's commitment to maintaining the local voter registration database. All transactions to a voter's record, including updates from the Secretary of State, updates from the California Department of Motor Vehicles, registration forms that we receive, requests from voters, confirmation cards, etc. All of this information is processed locally here by the staff at voter registration and elections. This also means that all of the voter notification cards, election materials, residency confirmation cards, election mailings, letters requesting additional information from voters will also be managed by the team here at voter registration and elections. But in addition to regular voter file maintenance, we also run the petition management for Sacramento County's portion of the statewide initiatives for ballot measures and local initiatives submitted to our Department for Signature Verification from governing bodies within our jurisdiction. We also have a program committed to educating and messaging to voters to encourage civic engagement and increase voter participation. This includes collaboration with stakeholders to ensure consistent and accurate information is being shared, attending community events to educate the public, conducting mandated committee meetings to engage our stakeholders, coordinating with local high schools to educate high school students on the importance of civic participation, and providing them with providing 16 and 17-year-old students the opportunity to pre-register to vote. We also conduct voter registration drives and provide voter registration forms upon request. But on top of all of that, we do open the doors to our facility on a regular basis to increase the transparency around elections. And by that, we mean that we conduct regularly scheduled office tours through our building just to ensure that voters, if they have any questions, we're able to address them accurately. And then we also provide all opportunities for election observation. So all of those things are always available ahead of every single election. So we have a poll question. Let's make sure that you guys were all paying attention. So how many registered voters does Sacramento County currently have? Haley, I think we can go ahead and close the poll and show the answers. And it looks like a lot of you were following along. So the answer is 878,370. So gold star for everybody. Go ahead and close that, Haley. We also have a team here that oversees and manages all the activities related to a vote by mail ballot. So for some context for you all, since 2018, about between 94 and 96% of our voters opt to vote the vote by mail ballot that we mail directly to them. Prior to 2018, this number was closer to 67%. This program is responsible for sending, receiving, verifying, and preparing all of the vote by mail ballots for each election. In addition, they oversee all of the voting activity for our military and overseas voting program. They also manage strict chain of custody requirements for ballot retrieval from all of our 60 official ballot drop box locations throughout the entire county. They are really the VRE equivalent of the United States Postal Service. In the November 2022 election, 50% of our voters that chose to vote utilized one of our 60 official ballot drop box locations. Another 45% of our voters utilized the United States Postal Service, and about 5% of our voters utilized one of our in-person voting opportunities at one of our 85 vote center locations across the county. So what is vote center operations? This program ensures that all voters in the county have the ability and opportunity to cast their ballot in person, receive voting assistance, and are provided with an accessible method to cast their ballot. In addition, they oversee the siting of locations to ensure that the location is ADA accessible. They select and train upwards of 1,400 election officers every election cycle that are responsible for working the vote center locations. They also ensure that there is enough equipment deployed and delivered to each of our 85 vote center locations. This is a largely collaborative operation and requires precise coordination across multiple divisions in VRE and across multiple county departments. So we do not by any means do this alone, but this also means that for a few weeks out of the year, VRE goes from one of the smaller county departments and quickly expands to one of the largest county departments with about 1,800 employees. We do have a dedicated program to develop and train staff regarding the nuances around elections, including state and national certification programs to ensure the VRE team is up to date with the best practices in election administration across the state and the nation. So for fiscal year 2023-2024, VRE's allocation of the budget is about $15.7 million. So a large portion, well, all of it, it's going to be funded by the general fund, but for elections that we administer, we do bill local districts for their share of the election administration costs. For this fiscal year, it comes out to about $1.3 million. This number will fluctuate based on the type of election that VRE is administering. We traditionally see less revenue come back during a primary election than we would during a general election because there are more local districts that jump on and participate in a general election. Therefore, we have more opportunities to recoup those election administration fees. In addition to that, we do have some state grant funds available. For this fiscal year, it is about a little bit over $500,000 or $580,333. As you can see, we don't receive a lot of other funding sources from state and federal entities. However, we are always regularly looking for opportunities for funding sources so that we can offset our impact to the general fund. So let's break our funding down by program. About 3% of our program is going to be for voter file maintenance, and this is going to include all of the data entry and the mailings that is required for us to maintain our voter registration database. Another 4% is going to be allocated to our voter education and outreach programs. So this is going to be our footprint in the community, ensuring that the public is aware that an election is around the corner. One of the largest programs in our budget will be the vote by mail and vote center operations. As you can see from this chart, our vote by mail operations takes up about 21% of our budget, and this will include the cost of printing, mailing, and verifying all components of a vote by mail ballot, in which between 94 and 96% of our voters utilize this service. In addition to the vote by mail operations, we have our vote center operations, which also takes up about 21% of our budget, and this will include all logistics for in-person voting, including facility use, training materials, and equipment. And this service is utilized by between 4 and 6% of our voters. And lastly, we have our administration, which takes up 26% of our budget. And because our department is so intertwined across multiple programs, this will include all of the staff program, the staff time required to support all of the previously mentioned programs. So at this point, you may be asking yourselves, how do we get involved? So there are a number of different ways. We have 3 distinct programs to allow the public to support our processes. First up, we have our high school student election officer program that is designed for 16 and 17-year-old students to participate in democracy and vote and work at a vote center location. We also have our regular election officer program that allows VRE to select and staff over 1,400 people to support the various in-person voting functions at a vote center, including check-in support and language assistance. Lastly, we have a dedicated program for county employees in which we message to 13,000 qualified civil servants to volunteer at VRE during an election. For more information, you can also go to elections.saccounty.gov. So we have another poll question to launch. A little bit of a trick question. How can you volunteer to work the election? Haley, I think that's enough time. Go ahead and show the results. And you all got it right, all of the above. So we have our election officer program, our high school student election officer program, and our county employee volunteer program. So you can go ahead and close that out, Haley. Thank you. Kim, is there any questions for VRE in the queue?
No open questions, Hang.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to pass you back over to our Chief Fiscal Officer, Amanda Thomas.
Great. Thank you, Hang. And this is perfect timing because you talked about how folks can get involved in the election process. And I want to end with this slide again, talking about how to get more information and how to get involved in the budget process. So I showed this earlier in the presentation, just wanted to show it again here. Again, this PowerPoint with all of these links will be available on the county's budget and debt management website. So that's bdm@saccounty.gov. I will pause just to see if there are any additional questions at this point. I am not seeing any popping up into the Q&A. So I really would at this point just like to thank all of my fellow panelists and especially the teams that are behind the scenes that made all this happen. And most importantly, thank all of you out there who came to join us tonight. Really appreciate your interest and your participation in the process. And that will conclude the webinar. So have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.